Just about every poem in the IGCSE English Literature anthology focuses on either death or childhood. One of the big death ones is Christina Rossetti's Remember. It's probably going to be familiar to you. It's a well-known, much-loved poem, and I've got to say there's a large number of these in the anthology, which is terrific. I'm going to subject it to my stump analysis. If you haven't watched my video on Kipling's If, you won't know what that is. So basically, it's a way of looking at poetry in relation to the letters of stump. So S is structure and form, T is tone, U is use of language, M is message, and P is point of view. If you cover all elements of stump, then there's very little else you can actually say about a poem. So it's a really helpful framework. That's the way I'm going to be looking at Rossetti's Remember. But before I do that, let's hear the poem read.
Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Only remember me. You understand it will be late to counsel then, or pray. Yet if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, better by far you should forget and smile, than that you should remember and be sad.
Okay, we're looking now at form and structure, and if you actually look at the poem as it is on the page, you'll see that the lines are all a similar length, which does suggest that this is some kind of verse form that we have here. If I now read it in a really rhythmic way, in other words, if I slaughter the poem, you probably will be able to pick out that rhythm. So here are the first few lines. Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Okay, I don't know if you got that or not, but there's a clear sort of beat through the line, and what we have, in fact, is iambic pentameter, just as we saw with If by Rudyard Kipling. So, iambic pentameter, a really important term, and one you'll be all too familiar with actually if you've studied Shakespeare, because his plays are written by and large in iambic pentameter. So it's a series of stressed and unstressed syllables which gives poetry its rhythm. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, da-dum, da-dum. And in iambic pentameter, there are 5 stressed syllables per line. In other words, da-dum, 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 da-dum. Pent obviously means 5, so 5 stressed syllables per line, and that's what gives the line of poetry its rhythm. And some people have compared it to the sound of a beating human heart, didum, 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 which is maybe why we don't even notice it. It sounds very natural, rhythmic, but it's certainly not in the foreground. It's an undercurrent in Rossetti's poem, which gives it its music in many ways. Rhyme scheme is the term we use when we describe a pattern of rhyme within a stanza. So words that rhyme are given the same letter, A being the first, B being the second, and so on. So we might describe a rhyme scheme as AB, AB, if alternate lines rhyme within the stanza of that poem. I'm going to put a slide up now of the first quatrain, in other words, the first 4 lines of Rossetti's poem, and you can study for yourself the rhyme scheme there. I'm sure you'll have had no difficulty at all identifying there an ABBA rhyme scheme. And if you look at the poem itself, you'll see that that continues for the next 4 lines. ABBA, ABBA. And it's not until the final section of the poem that Rossetti introduces a change to the rhyme scheme. So I'll put the last 6 lines up now. Obviously we're going to be starting with the letter C because this is a new rhyme, and what I'd like you to do is identify the rhyme scheme for those final 6 lines. So it starts with C. If you noted down C, D, D, E, C, E, then you got it absolutely spot on, because that is the rhyme scheme for the final 6 lines of the poem. It doesn't really matter actually, except to say that clearly we've got 2 rhyme schemes going on in this poem. We've got a first section of 8 lines, which is ABBA, ABBA, and then we've got a second section which introduces different rhyming sounds. And this makes Rossetti's poem an Italian sonnet, in fact, because they're always written like that. The first 8 lines are called an octave, and the final 6 lines are called a sestet. So we've established that remember is written in the form of an Italian sonnet, which shouldn't be too difficult to remember because Rossetti is obviously a very Italian sounding name, and Christina, Rossetti's parents, were in fact Italian, so quite appropriate that she should use that form. The form also helps us interpret the poem in that we know with Italian sonnets that the opening octave is going to introduce a main idea, and then that idea is developed or commented on in the closing sestet, and there may be in the closing sestet a shift of tone, or perhaps a problem which is introduced in the octave is solved in the final 6 lines of the sonnet. But whatever, there's certainly a shift of tone always, and that is marked by the change in the rhyme scheme. So we now move on to looking at the tone of remember, and we're going to focus on this idea of the opening 8 lines introducing an idea, and then we're going to look out for the shift that happens in the sestet and the change of tone that goes with that. Let's listen then to the first section of remember, the octave, and then have a think about the idea that Rossetti is developing in those lines and the tone that she creates through that.
Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Only remember me. You understand it will be late to counsel then, or pray.
The idea in those opening lines is quite a simple one. Rossetti is facing imminent death in the poem, and she wants her lover to remember her after she's gone. It's as simple as that. She does not want to be forgotten. The tone could be described as melancholy, sad, mournful, perhaps insistent though, because she does repeat 3 times, remember me. It's clearly very important to her that she isn't forgotten, and that's what the octave is all about. It changes though, as we would expect with an Italian sonnet, with the word yet. So if I play the next section, note that it starts with yet, and you'll see there that the idea, simple in the first octave, is complicated in the final sestet.
Yet if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, Better by far you should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sad.
A simple idea then, to be remembered, becomes a complicated one as Rossetti seems to really think this through and perhaps put herself more in the shoes of her lover, the one who's left behind, and the tone of the poem becomes more compassionate in the sestet because she's arguing now that it would be better for him to forget her if remembering is going to cause him pain. She would rather he forgot than remembered and be sad. We now arrive at the U of our STUMP acronym and with that, use of language. I think the first thing to say about use of language in this poem is that it is very simple. It's almost as if Rossetti is using everyday words to address her lover as clearly as she can. This is an important message. She doesn't want this to be any kind of a mystery. So the language is quite everyday, really. It's simple. That's not to say, though, that it's not also poetic. Obviously, we've already looked at the fact that this is a sonnet, so we have a lulling iambic rhythm running through it. We have a rhyme scheme. But Rossetti also uses other poetic devices to emphasise points and to create moods within the poem. One of the key ones of these is repetition. Remember is a poem full of repetition, so I'll pick out some examples of that now. This is my copy of the sonnet, and I've been through just now and underlined all of the key words that are repeated, and you will see at a glance that there is an awful lot of repetition in this poem. It's a key device for Rossetti. I've already said that it's called Remember. We know that titles of poems are always worth thinking about, so we know that this notion of remember is important, and I've already said as well that the phrase remember me is repeated 3 times in the poem's octave. It's an imperative, a command, gives the octave some of its power. Rossetti is insisting that she is not forgotten. Remember me, she commands her lover. In the sestet, she again uses the word remember, but she contrasts it also with its opposite. The word forget makes it an appearance in the sestet, and she acknowledges that grief is actually a process of remembering and forgetting, and comes to accept that. And we see that through the way that she repeats the word forget, because the first time she says it, the line goes, yet if you should forget me for a while and afterwards remember, do not grieve. If you should forget me. She's introducing this as an idea. He might forget her. But later, in the second appearance of that word, she actually turns that into an imperative. So now we have better by far you should forget and smile and remember and be sad. So he might forget, then he must forget. So that repeated use of the word forget shows a shift in her thinking. Other words that are repeated include in the octave the notion of distance. Rossetti says that she will be gone away, gone far away. She repeats immediately, emphasising this notion of her being gone, vanished. And this octave is a lament. It's full of despair, full of sadness, full of regret. And the repetition does emphasise that. We've got the phrase no more working in a similar way. No more will she hold her lover's hand. No more will he plan for their future. So no more again adds to the sense of this being a lament, a regret. She talks about the lover planning their future day by day. Again, repetition, this time creating the sense of time unlimited, as if these two have all the days in the world to plan a future. And of course that's very poignant in the context of this poem, because we now know that Rossetti's days are in fact numbered. There is no longer day after day. Cheers. maybe just a few days, we're not sure. So the repetition in that octave adds to its bleak melancholy. In the final sestet, there is actually less repetition, and we have this notion of forgetting introduced. So the tone does change. It is more complicated, and we have Rossetti perhaps accepting death, accepting that life is going to go on without her, and actually wanting her lover to be happy rather than to live his life missing her and feeling sad. In the octave as the silent land. And that doesn't sound to me like a very appealing sort of destination. Silent land suggests an empty place, a place of no connections, no relationships, no communication. And her use of rhyme is important here as well, because the word land is rhymed with the word hand. And so those two ideas of the lover's warm hand and this empty land of death are cemented in the ear of the reader. So that adds to the pathos, I think, around this image of death as a silent land. Similarly, in the sestet, she talks about, well, she almost invites us to peer at her corpse, and she talks about its darkness and corruption. Again, not a comfortable image. She is avoiding euphemisms in this poem, so death isn't being presented as a sleep or as a resting place. She's very directly here describing the inevitable decay of the human body, darkness and corruption. Not an easy or comfortable image. It's not an easy sonnet. I think it would be foolish to try to simply paraphrase this sonnet, because, as we've seen, it is difficult and people will interpret it in different ways, and that is, of course, the beauty of poetry. That's what poetry is all about. But what we can say with some certainty is that Rossetti has important things that she wants to say to her lover about death. Initially, she wants to be remembered, but then as the sonnet complicates, in other words, as we reach the sestet and that more complicated rhyme scheme, her thinking becomes more complex as well, and she seems to accept the fact of her passing, the fact that she will be forgotten, and to see some solace in that, because if her lover does forget her, then he's not going to live the rest of his life feeling sad, and that ultimately is the idea that she leaves the reader with. The last word of the poem is sad. So perhaps it's a sonnet about the triumph of love over despair, because her final thoughts aren't about death at all. Her final thoughts are about her lover, Now we arrive
and
at the
about wishing
stump,
him
and with that point of view, we've already established that this is a sonnet written in the first person, and the voice we're hearing is that of a lover addressing her beloved prior to her imminent death. What we don't know is whether the poem is actually autobiographical. Is Rossetti herself the lover, or is she putting herself into the shoes of a lover? In a sense, it doesn't really matter. This is just the style that Rossetti has chosen to explore the notions of remembering, forgetting, love and death in. But it's actually quite unlikely that it is autobiographical, because Rossetti wrote this poem when she was only 19 and not facing imminent death. Her father was on the deathbed, and clearly death would have been something she'd have been thinking about a lot, and she did have a lover. So she is drawing on real experience in a sense, but I don't think that she's telling her own story within this sonnet. As I've said, though, that doesn't really matter. The important thing is the sonnet itself, and the fact that what we hear in this is a lover talking directly to her beloved. And now we arrive at the P of stump, and with that point of view. We've already established that this is a sonnet written in the first person, and the voice we're hearing is that of a lover addressing her beloved prior to her imminent death. What we don't know is whether the poem is actually autobiographical. Is Rossetti herself the lover, or is she putting herself into the shoes of a lover? In a sense, it doesn't really matter. This is just the style that Rossetti has chosen to explore the notions of remembering, forgetting, love and death in. But it's actually quite unlikely that it is autobiographical, because Rossetti wrote this poem when she was only 19 and not facing imminent death. Her father was on the deathbed, and clearly death would have been something she'd have been thinking about a lot, and she did have a lover. So she is drawing on real experience in a sense, but I don't think that she's telling her own story within this sonnet. As I've said though, that doesn't really matter. The important thing is the sonnet itself.